Amagnerat ike tesolderat igmerut.
Hey all, Dave here. Welcome to the seventh part in the Seven Types of Atheism book review that we've been doing the past 7 weeks, I guess. The book is by John Gray, as you probably already know, and this is the final chapter before the conclusion, and it's centered around Arthur Schopenhauer and Spinoza. Baruch Spinoza. Sorry, my brain went blank then. And it was titled Atheism of Silence. The Atheism of Silence. And so we're just going to have a discussion about it like we normally do. How's it going, Rev? You doing okay today?
Doing all right. Just crack-a-lacking along here in Tennessee.
Did you enjoy the chapter?
I did. And again, haven't seen the names of Schopenhauer and Spinoza, but not really knowing too much about who they were, what times they lived, what they thought. The biographical information on its own was interesting. And also some of the back and forth that these gentlemen had with their other contemporaries or influences is nice to kind of put that all together. And, I don't think I'll ever, really deep dive into philosophy, but I think a good place to start is understanding, the top 20 guys, who they were, what time period, what countries they were from, and their basic, impacts that they had. It's starting to become clearer and clearer. So from that aspect, yes, I liked it a lot. Also, the atheism of silence is like the most appealing atheism I think I could ever imagine. So I read that
some of that.
Yeah, I was like, we're not going to have the atheism of shouty, angry person,
I mean, they had that as the first chapter in only about 5 pages, and which is about all it really deserves in the history of atheism.
Yeah, and here's a couple of guys that really put some effort into their atheism. Schopenhauer never used a meme. Always refused. He's like, not going to go there, not going to make memes. And I think one of the things that's lost in a lot of the rhetoric online is allowing for the possibility of a God to exist allows for some pretty strong discourse and exploration of thought and expanding boundaries and understanding humanity. And I've never really wanted to be one of the ones that just shit on the ideas of people believing in gods and exploring it, especially at the level that these guys did. Or like an Aquinas or an Augustine. And again, some of their conclusions I don't agree with, but I appreciate the journey they took.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at somebody like Plato argued that I can't remember who said the actual phrase, but if God didn't exist, it would be necessary to invent him. But Plato kind of argued that way back when in the Republic. He argued that a God existing is something that we should strive for as a society because it allows us to ground morality, it allows us to ground laws, authority, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And not only that, dealing with things of like grief or, that is something that religion initially didn't provide people an outlet for, and then Christianity did. And, the common atheist trope about your God sucks, he's so horrible. That's people struggling with death and grief and tragic events. And it's tried to put a box around it or explain it. And I think as these religions got a little more sophisticated, like as we learned early on in the book, separating belief from religion is a kind of a critical uh,
Yeah.
boundary to establish, but then also to allow for a growth in belief, and then tying your beliefs into something like morality, and exploring grief and evil and why do bad things happen, and trying to find explanations for them, rather than, in more sophisticated look at things. And again,
Yeah.
you don't have to agree with the conclusions, but you can appreciate maybe our grief isn't just tied to the god of, liquor drinks is pissed at me, and that's why I got
Yeah.
him over.
Yeah.
So there's more to it. And then that guy saying, well, maybe, if I don't drink as much because of some sort of having a sensibility, or not being gluttonous with liquor drinks, if that's even a thing, I don't know.
That, there's no such thing.
There's no
How
such thing,
dare
but
you?
for the sake of argument, let's
Let's just go with it.
yeah. That's but people starting to say, where the boundaries should be, and having that movement, and a lot of these principles, like it or not, are still what we have today.
Yeah. As much as people hate to admit it, especially atheists, religion like Christianity has contributed a whole lot to our society. Music, art, literature,
Buildings.
morality, buildings, yeah, architecture. It has had a massive influence just because that's the way it turned out.
Yeah. And one of the common atheist tropes again is the whole, why are the poorest countries the most religious, right?
Yeah.
It's because simply they was poor, and in a bad shape before anybody showed up with religion. It's just that the religious people are keeping them from starving. So
Yeah.
your options are starve to death or go to church. Well, go to church.
Yeah.
And that's why those countries are the most religious. And especially like in the United States, charitable donations is dominated by the religious, even
Yeah.
per capita. And as the religiosity of this country falls, so does charity.
Yeah.
And that's one of the downsides to it. So a lot of people have had wonderful life-changing experiences in hospitals funded by religious people. And again, that there's a bad that comes with that for sure, but it is what it is, and it's what's gotten us to this point.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of atheists who will say things like, well, religion is just a crutch for people who can't handle, life or deal with reality.
Mhm.
I don't really think there's anything wrong with that, as long
No.
as they're not causing harm to other people.
Yeah, and you know what? If you have a broken leg, you need a crutch, right?
Yeah.
And that's just sensible. And again, you take a step back and say, why does that person need a crutch? Grief,
Yeah.
crisis, tragedy. Your country's getting shit bombed by some other country. Yeah, you need a crutch. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that weak, or is that because you're broken and
Better than turning to heroin for a crutch.
yeah. And again, it's survival, right?
Yeah.
Your brain is saying, here's a crutch, just hobble to the next level. And it doesn't give up. So giving up would be not using a crutch. And again, a kind of an arrogant place to say what that person needs better than they do.
Yeah.
And I agree 100% that you don't see a guy with a broken leg and you're like, oh, look at this asshole with his crutch here. What
Kick
is
the
he
crutches
doing?
out from under him.
Yeah, come on, man. And there,
Just learn to walk.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Embrace reason and logic, and don't use your crutch. You know?
The new atheist faith healer, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, that's
All
right.
you need is logic and reason. That'll fix that broken leg.
Yeah, and like the book has said, we're wired for survival, not logic and reason.
Yeah.
And truth. And
Yeah.
and that's kind of one of the big topics between Schopenhauer and Spinoza, is both of them, thought humanity was kind of a bunch of dipshits. I mean, they definitely did not have a high opinion of our state of affairs.
No, and Schopenhauer was one of those that thought humans were mostly irrational.
Yeah, and the funny thing about him is, even though he found humans incurably irrational, I think was the quote.
Yeah.
He was super prudent with his life. Like everything he did was to the T, and it kind of goes against the Santayana guy who we talked about last chapter, who kind of believed like you need to live your philosophy.
Yeah.
He was pretty much like, there's no point in this, but yet I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock every morning and live my life as if there's a whole bunch of points to it.
Yeah, and he was kind of a hedonist as well.
Yeah. And in fact, his inspiration in life was primarily through music, which is, and that's a guy who never even heard Coltrane, and and so kudos to him. They probably had to listen to those dudes playing those goofy little stringy piano things.
Yeah.
And if he found some sort of sense of spirituality in that, man, that's awesome. And another common thread was that both these fellas definitely had a sense of spirituality, and unabashedly so.
Yeah. And not the kind of spirituality that most atheists think of, like religion-driven spirituality.
Right.
A reverence for the universe, passion for music, like you say, a sort of happiness about nature and that kind of thing. And even though they hated people, they still had that sense of spirituality about the universe itself. I mean, Spinoza saw the universe as God.
Yeah, right. And also, we've all felt that, right? Like music, a piece of art. You go look at something like the ocean or the Grand Canyon, a Jason Statham film. There's all sorts of these kind of transcending events we have in our life, and I think it's all right to just say, and appreciate that, right? We don't have to understand it, and we don't have to, but to be able to say, there are things in my life that I can experience that get me past my mundane experiences of going to work, eating my dinner, sleeping, and all those things bring some degree of pleasure. But that certain something when you're just like, whoa, and this is why I'm here, and maybe that's a good way to look at it. It's like this moment right here kind of justifies everything else.
The banality. Yeah,
the banality of it all. Yeah, and so it's good to see. And again, these fellas were super purposeful in their philosophy. It wasn't, and almost in a way, both I think are considered atheists, but they almost created a god.
Yeah, I mean, Spinoza literally did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, you're like, whoa, new atheists there, settle down. You can have a philosophical God. And, even if that is your way to explain the universe, then that's okay.
Yeah.
You're not worshiping it. You're not saying that it cares about what we do.
Yeah. Or saying, it's offering us a bunch of rules to live by. It's basically, there are certain things about the universe and about our existence that really, they take some explaining. Like if you think of something like mathematics, and I think this is something like Spinoza. Spinoza was very mathematics based. There are certain necessary truths that exist.
Mhm.
And like 1+1 is a necessary truth. Numbers are necessary truths. You can't imagine a universe where the number 1 isn't the number 1. You might be able to imagine a universe where it's a different numeral, like a different representation of the actual number itself. But you can't really imagine a universe where 1+1 doesn't equal 2.
Right.
And so an idea of a transcendent existence. Plato used the forms, Spinoza used the universe as God.
Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of Spinoza was, it's a way to explain these necessary truths.
Yeah. And now both of them were very vocally anti-Christian.
Yeah.
And Spinoza, in fact, I think he got kicked out of he was Jewish,
Yeah.
and they're like, yeah, no more of this stuff, fella, and sent him down the road. And there's even a part where, the other kind of interesting thing about Schopenhauer was he was, I think, one of the very first folks to really try to understand the Eastern philosophies.
Yes.
From the people that were from the West.
Yeah.
Of course, the people in the East are already trying to understand Eastern philosophies. But
yeah,
you made a comment like, how silly is Christianity, where you have this one point in history where this one guy does this one thing and everything pivots off that one point. But then the Eastern folks are like, we'll make as many Buddhas as we need.
Yeah.
We'll have a Buddha for each era. So each era has its own answers, its own question, its own, Son of God sort of, coming down and answering our questions and giving us spiritual guidance. And so he I don't know that he believed it, but he thought it was like smart. He thought it was smart. And even in this country, it'd be cool if we rewrote the Constitution every 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
No, rather than just saying this is the one that these slaveholders wrote 200 and whatever years ago. So this is the one we're going to use for never, never, amen.
Yeah. Update it to, say, gun laws. It's, I mean, that is one of the things that they teach in the East. Like here, it's, or in Christian based, it's, God is always watching you. Whatever you do is going to be written about. You're going to get punished for it. But the idea of karma and stuff in Eastern philosophy, and it's be good to everybody you meet because the person you meet next might be the Buddha. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of my favorite musicals of all time, Jesus Christ Superstar. There's part at the end where Judas is gone. You don't really. He's Jesus is been crucified, and there's a last number where him and it's actually just Judas, but Judas is left this plane of existence as well. And you don't know, is he in heaven or hell? That's kind of they kind of do some imagery because that's not important, but there's a line in there where he basically is like, if you came today, you could have reached a whole nation. Israel in 4 BC had no mass communication. And, and they mentioned the Buddha and the Muhammad's and, why were you better than this rather than, and so they saw the problems with Christianity.
Yeah.
and moved past that and just said, like if God's the universe, and like people will get hung up on evolution, and then how does life start? Well, we don't know, but just say God did it and walked
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's okay. And if you can say that, just say that God pointed his finger and took the next bus out of town.
Yeah.
And people get way too caught up, and I think there's another avenue of allowing and say, well, what if there was this creator for these things that we don't understand, and put all this in place? Let's talk about all the stuff we know and not get hung up on this one thing that really isn't critical to what we're trying to do in our micro thing, and to just allow for the macro. It started somehow, we know that, but whether it was God or some sort of slimy amoeba thing,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter.
And I mean, you can see how something like God would be a good explanation for most people. It isn't for me, but you can see how people have problems understanding how we get from non-life to life, from
Mhm.
single cell to multicellular, from slime to conscious beings to self-conscious beings. And it is much easier to just think, well, there's a God that did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God's a placeholder.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I hate the saying, I think it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. I hate what he says, but God is an ever receding pocket of ignorance. And I think he's right, but I think he's saying that in a derogatory way. And I don't mean it in a derogatory way. But like you say, it's a placeholder for all the mysteries that we still have about the universe and our existence. And
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. And it would be better, because, the whole what about this or what about that? I think it's better to concede it and say, yeah, perhaps a God did point its finger and do it. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. We don't know, but then we can stop talking about that and then talk about the moral issues, or the issues we need to, now that or evolution or whatever, and just say God touched his finger and then evolution happened. That much we know. And
Yeah.
not argue about the things that nobody has an answer for, and pretend like, so is it like you said about Plato, it's almost like this necessary placeholder. It's like when they have those big crime boards, like you see in the movies, where they got the pictures and the strings,
and
they just put a question mark there. Boom. And and there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to say we don't know this. Boom. Call it God, call it the big turtle in the sky. I don't know. Just whatever silliness it is, that's not important. So these guys, like I say, sort of had an appreciation, I think, and definitely in Schopenhauer's. And I don't know that Spinoza would have been even exposed to Eastern philosophies.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but Schopenhauer, was in the late 18th century. Certainly was, and was, I would think, positively influenced by him.
Yeah, and he was also, he really didn't like Hegel, did he? That came across in this chapter.
Yeah. In fact, yeah. In now, is Hegel a person you're familiar with?
I don't know his work very well. He's a very difficult philosopher to read.
Or he's German?
Yeah, he's. People say he's impenetrable, but I don't think he is. It's just not who I've read.
Right.
He's big influence on Marx.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
He was one of those that thought history was telling a tale. He
Right.
saw existence as will as being, and he had a whole bunch of ideas, but unfortunately, I've not studied them very well.
Yeah, and in my experience, if you on the other side of the coin, the most dense theological writings, come from like the Germans.
Yeah.
Um, they use their vocabulary and they
Yeah.
wrote about their thoughts. That's for sure. And
Well,
yeah,
Kant was another one.
yeah, right. And these guys that had sort of this belief that you can look at history and see this progression pattern or this, like, hey, we're there's a reason for this, and that's not to say you shouldn't study history, but the patterns that we think that are there probably aren't.
No, and we're just that kind of being where we're very good at seeing patterns where they're not. It's part of our survival.
Yeah, and then they made I think Schopenhauer for sure made the comment that we're basically on this path with these guys for like an emancipation from God to our own gods, being our own
Yeah.
God. And he's like, nah, we're too dumb for that.
Yeah. I mean that's one big way he differed from Nietzsche.
Yeah. Yeah, is that there was yes, Nietzsche was like the scream the death of God from the tallest building.
Yeah.
And his whole thing was to, and it's one of those again, it's one of those kind of Christian criticisms you see where y'all just want to be your own gods. There is some truth in a lot of that philosophy.
Yeah.
It's to replace the monotheistic God with ourselves as being the gods, and this like moving out of God's basement and getting our own job and doing it ourselves.
Yeah, creating our own values and morals, and basically taking control of the direction of humanity.
Yeah, and Schopenhauer actually said any philosophy in which history is a process of human self-emancipation, he said, what history relates is in fact only the long and heavy confused dream of mankind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good quote.
Yeah.
I really do need to read some Schopenhauer. I do actually have on the Kindle all of his stuff, just never actually got around to reading it yet.
Yeah, and the other thing that he basically disagreed with Hegel on is he basically said monotheism and humanism are both fictions, and we're acting together create the illusion that history contains some sort of redeeming significance.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be a theme from Gray as well throughout this, pointing out that history has no redeeming significance.
Yeah, and I think in his other book, I think it's called Straw Dogs, he really breaks down the idea that we are evolving in the way we think we are, socially, progressively. And I know he takes some swats at like liberalism, and I couldn't speak to it at all, but I think that's like his bread and butter, is getting away that, and that's why he likes these guys is, I think we almost ignore our history when we're trying to push away from God. It's like, look how good we're doing. And, as we get less religious, we're going to get more and more, like the Jetsons or something like that.
I mean, there's a lot of atheists who believe that. Like
Yeah.
the memes, if religion didn't exist, this is where we'd be. And they have like spaceships and super tall skyscrapers and whatnot, and science being 1,000 years ahead than it is now.
Yeah.
Have they not met humanity?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And Just I guess keep watching the Jetsons or something.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then
we're definitely closer to the Flintstones than the Jetsons.
yeah,
And we
that's right.
probably would be even closer to the Flintstones if it wasn't for religion in some cases.
Yeah, and again, there's religion is natural. It really truly is, and you can just see that every group has some sort of religion that pulls them all together, kind of sorts them all out, and the problem is never going to be religion or science, but humanity.
It'll always be humanity, yeah.
And to treat the Bible like your skin is going to peel off if you touch it, or burst into flames if you walk into a church. That's none of those things do anything. Gods don't do anything. The Bible doesn't do anything. Religion doesn't do anything. Science doesn't do anything. It's the people.
It's the people, yeah.
And hold the ones that do bad things accountable for what they do, and lift up the ones that are doing the good things, and help them, do
Help them achieve
more.
those good things, yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things that was interesting is, he was, Gray used the term, mystical atheism, which,
Yeah.
Again, kind of is sort of one of those raise your eyebrow kind of ideas. But I suppose it's like a lot of your Eastern religions don't really center around a god or an afterlife. And again, pushing spiritual and philosophical sort of boundaries, and doing it under a pretense of, a reason or whatever.
Yeah.
You have to have some kind of guidelines or boundaries. But he pointed out this one guy, Meister Eckhart, who actually prayed to God to rid him of the idea of God.
Yeah, I thought that was such a good thing in that chapter. It was like, it wasn't something I'd ever even thought of.
Yeah.
I've never heard of Meister Eckhart.
No.
Like, I think he says that nobody would have heard of him if it wasn't for a couple of pages in somebody's biography or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really good. Pray to God to get rid of God.
Yeah, get rid of the idea of God.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways that's probably more sensible, because there's definitely some of these philosophers that truly believe the only way to not believe in God is to not have the idea of God.
Yeah.
And that the idea of God in of itself is some sort of belief. And it's probably pretty hard to put those cows back in the barn.
Yeah. And like, you can kind of understand how our cultures got there. Needing to explain certain things. Like, I know it's popular in atheist circles to say, religion was created for control and power. But I think the idea of God, it would have come about because people needed explanations for certain things. And there's certain ideas, like when you think about a past infinite time, well, how do you explain getting here? Like William Lane Craig might argue, if it went on infinite past, we would never have got here. And why do, like you said before, why do bad things happen to good people? So we create the idea of the God testing us. And I mean, even in some Eastern cultures, you think about the Chinese culture, they had the Jade Emperor, and it was a polytheistic system, but he was still like a supreme god, and that supreme God was used to explain certain things. Why is there so much suffering? Well, because the Jade Emperor got bored and left humanity to it.
Yeah.
So I think no matter what, humans would have created God.
They had to. You
Yeah.
just you know, like you said, the Neil deGrasse Tyson quote. We need that. You know, he could have said it in a better way, but we needed those placeholders. We needed we had to address our gaps and say, you know, we have no explanation for this. And
Yeah.
you know, again, the important thing isn't the acknowledgement of God, it's the putting that placeholder there so you can have the discussion and go around it and squeeze the gaps closer and closer together. If you don't identify the gaps, you can't close them up either.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And if you keep God there as the placeholder, I suppose it makes it easier in some way to keep a check on what we still have faith in, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Like we still, a lot of people argue, you know, abiogenesis. We don't actually know how we came about. Abiogenesis, there's still a lot of stuff to be answered there. And a lot of atheists are absolutely certain that, you know, abiogenesis will explain this. But they're ignoring the fact that they're having faith in that. Yeah. Whereas if God is the placeholder, you can say, well, I just have faith here.
Right. And even if abiogenesis is a thing, does that mean that's what happened?
That's it. Yeah.
You know, so yeah, okay, but is that what happened? And you know, again, it's just, you know, the need to happen. You don't know why it happened. It's quite all right to say it was God, because it at least says we can investigate now why this happened, learn about it, and then you start to figure out more and more why it happened and or how it happened. And so until that point of clarity comes, you know, like I say, or, you know, God can be all the knowledge, or God can be all the math formulas and everything that we have to figure out our place. You know, it doesn't have to be every time you hear God or faith, believe, spirit, you know, you have an incident.
Yeah. And I think a lot of atheists kind of forget that that's how science came about. At least in the Western tradition that we kind of know now, it was people trying to explain how God did it. Yeah, it was trying to get closer to God and trying to figure God out. Science has moved past that now, obviously, but that was a major driver for a lot of the scientists back then.
Yeah, and perhaps the ironic thing is, the closer we flew to God, the more we erased him.
Yeah,
you know, and that's fine. You know, that's. But if you don't know which direction you're going or what you need to fly towards, then it's rather pointless.
You're adrift at sea, like Conrad.
Yep, that's right. And so then Gray moves into the next part, and he actually calls Spinoza a negative theology, and then he makes a comment where he basically says, you know, it's hard to distinguish between atheism and the negative theology. But basically, it's something like this: an atheist who denies that any God created the world may affirm a God that permeates the world, but about which little or nothing positive can be said. And Spinoza's basically that.
Sorry, I muted to take a drink and forgot to unmute. But yeah, that is basically what Spinoza, his argument kind of is. He wasn't so much getting rid of God like somebody like Nietzsche. He was just moving it elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was because, like I said earlier, there are just these necessary truths to the universe that need to be explained. I was just looking up negative theology because, like, I've heard the term, but I couldn't really place it. It's like Christian mysticism. It refers to theologies which regard negative statements as primary in expressing our knowledge of God and stuff like that. I thought it was like a negative theology of God's gone. I guess Nietzsche, something like that.
Yeah, I think again, it's and basically, I think where Spinoza ends up is basically the universe is God.
Yeah, it's a form of pantheism, except most pantheists believe that the universe has a divine mind, whereas Spinoza didn't see the universe as having a divine mind. It just is the divine.
Right.
It's our creator. It doesn't have a purpose for us, but we can learn stuff about how to treat each other from the universe. And like a lot of his ethics is based in a sort of natural law.
Right. Yeah, and Gray used to define an atheist as a person who has no need for the creator God.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot more sense now, because if you believe that the universe is God, I'm sure some people would argue that, well, okay, you're a theist, and because you believe in some sort of God, but it's way more complicated than that, and there's way more nuanced. But Spinoza, like Schopenhauer, they didn't believe in the progression of man through humanity or the divine monotheistic God.
Yeah.
So, again, it's making, and then they made some comparisons to. I was going to ask you about this. They made comparison to Anselm's ontological argument.
Yeah, it's have you heard the argument you can conceive of no greater being? God is the greatest conceivable being. How does it go again? Sorry, like I said earlier, it's been a very long day. The greatest conceivable God is the greatest conceivable being you can think of. Any being that exists, any being you can imagine, it would be greater if it existed, so therefore God exists. Because if you can imagine it and he is the greatest conceivable being, then the greatest conceivable being exists.
All right. And that's probably not too far off from where Spinoza was.
Yeah. The universe is the greatest conceivable being.
Yeah.
And being doesn't necessarily have to refer to being as we use it for like a human being. Being just means existence in philosophy. Something has being if it exists. So the universe is the greatest conceivable being because without the universe, nothing else would exist. And that's basically how Spinoza saw it.
Yeah.
The universe is eternal. It has always existed. It is the creator of everything. even if it's a mindless creator, it's still the creator of everything.
Right. And he says we shouldn't have any emotion or sympathy towards it. And he actually kind of his catchphrase was laugh not, weep not, be not angry, but understand.
But understand, yeah.
And that was his kind of catchphrase, I guess. If you had t-shirts back then, that's what it would be.
Frilly shirt with it tagged around the collar.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And again, he was searching more for a freedom, but also kind of like this freedom just to understand that the world kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
And it is as it must be.
Yeah.
And that's,
he saw that there were certain ineffable qualities about the universe as well. Like certain things we would never understand. And I suppose that's, that's another reason why he saw it in a kind of godlike way. Because God is ineffable. Well, as they say, God is beyond our understanding. Well, so is the universe.
Yeah. In what happens, it's almost like he takes the view that God is basically fate.
Yeah. God is a useful fiction.
Yeah. And the freedom we get is just to accept what happens, as not that it's predetermined or anything like that, but it's just as it must be.
Yeah, everything that happens, it doesn't happen for a purpose, but it was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, and that's something like you see more with like the Greeks. We're really fate oriented, as opposed to they didn't necessarily look for progression or look for moving towards the gods. They were kind of the gods' playthings.
Yeah.
And you get a freedom by just understanding that as fate rather than trying to put meaning on everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I suppose that's kind of a hard thing to do for most people, because we're pattern seeking beings, we tend to see meaning in things.
Yeah, and part of leaving God or leaving religion should be not to try to find meaning in something else.
Yeah.
Be it humanism or...
I suppose that's one thing that Santayana highlighted. He wasn't looking for meaning in everything. He was just looking to enjoy his life.
Yeah. And for the most part, yeah, I don't get the sense that Spinoza or Schopenhauer were miserable, angry, dark, gothic, angsty people either.
No, Schopenhauer's philosophy is, as far as I'm aware.
Yes.
But Schopenhauer wasn't.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's a precautionary thing, right? It's sort of like, if you go down this path, and one of the criticisms, and a fair one, of a lot of Christians is, why are you so miserable?
Yeah.
And I think people that burden themselves with trying to find meaning in everything in the way that they need to, or that their understanding doesn't jive with what they want, it bums a person out.
Yeah.
So, understand, accept, and move on, and enjoy your life. Because you do see a lot of folks, trying to outguess God, so to speak. And, if I do this, then this, and if I, and even in you get programmed to think that way and do that way. But just also, religion has its place. Leave it alone. Just, you're not part of it. It's doing its thing. That's fate. That's the universe. That's how it all exists. It is what it is.
Yeah. And I mean, it's sort of like in the last chapter, Santayana says, religion has a necessary place. When it's doing good, leave it be. When it's doing bad, step in and complain.
Yep.
And I think that's where the balance has gone wrong with contemporary atheists.
Mm-hmm.
They're no longer just anti-evangelical. They're no longer fighting just against the people trying to put creationism in schools, trying to take evolution out of schools. Now, every theist is anti-homosexual. Every theist wants evolution taken out of school. They jump down the throats.
Everything telling is Christian. You're going to burn in hell. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you've said, it's a dehumanizing effort.
Yeah.
And it's unfair because most theists, aren't Christian, and we don't take the time to understand every last series of God beliefs. I sure don't. I've definitely been asked, well, why don't you ever say anything about Muslim or Jewish? I just don't know.
I've criticized Muslims in the past and Islam in the past.
Yes. If I see a specific thing,
yes,
but I can't speak to, their beliefs or how much of it I agree with or disagree with until they say something that I agree with or disagree with. And and again, it's a very leftover remnant from Christianity to have a good side and an evil side, and a savior, science, and or me as an atheist. And again, it's the same guy that me as a Christian is going to save people. Now, this is how me as an atheist is going to save people.
Yeah.
I have the same crazy sense of urgency. If you don't see the truth, you're dumb. You don't understand things. It's all the same. And I think that's one of the sad things about, I always kind of think now that every person, when they deconvert or convert, should go through a 0 point, but they don't. They just go straight across. They just go straight across. And sometimes I see the new atheist kind of folks, and I'm just like, man, I wonder what you were like as a Christian, because I can imagine.
I think they would be just the same. And I mean, something that I've been thinking for a long time now is the whole savior thing, like you were just mentioning. I don't know if you've seen the meme, old atheists staying quiet and allowing themselves to be beaten over the head by religion. New atheists, where they come in, they're angry and they're going to save all the old atheists from the bowing under the pressure of like whatever local religion is like crushing them. They see themselves as the saviors of atheism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, as the savior. Yeah. And and save. And again, you have the bad guy that need to be saved from. And again, then it takes the form of theism, which is so unfair and so inaccurate. It's just flat out wrong. But the guy Gray, he kind of closes the chapter with this thought. He's speaking of this other character that they talked about that I wasn't familiar with, Shestov.
Yeah,
And
I've never heard of him before, unfortunately.
yeah, and there wasn't a whole lot there that struck me, but I like this last stating kind of this summary of Shestov was what he wanted was to return to things as they were before the fall, when all things seemed possible, and fall being capitalized as the fall of man. But the fall is the price of consciousness. There's no way back.
And I mean, that is one of the readings of the Genesis story, the fall story, is that it's talking about us becoming self-aware and self-conscious, and that's what has led to the suffering of mankind kind of idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I like to say, you can't put those cows back in the barn.
Nope.
And that's the seven types of atheism, and I think next week there's a conclusion that's rather short, but I think if you're up for it, it would be cool to do sort of our takeaways in a summary.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I've got lots of thoughts on the different stuff that's been talked about and some of the themes, and my thoughts on some of them. And so
and if any of the folks that have bore with us for these last seven episodes have any questions or things that you wonder about, or comments,
their own criticisms
and whatnot, sure like to hear from them. And
well, if they leave them in the comment section of this video, we'll come to them next week, and I'll go back because I know there's been some older comments left on the older videos.
Yeah,
so I'll go through them and pull out some of those. Like, I know there was one posted yesterday under the last one saying there's only 3 types of atheism. There's non-believer, disbeliever, and unbeliever, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's all based on the burden of proof in that comment.
Right. And as a person who clearly hasn't watched the video and understanding that we're talking about the characteristics of the person, like if you said types of theists, you might say, well, there's Christians, there's Jews, there's Muslims, there's Eastern
Buddhists,
deists. And then you might say within Christians, there's evangelicals, liberal, progressive, Christian nationalists, and talk about the different types of Christians that are out there. So this isn't, and that's such the tedious thing, is then everything turns out to a bunch of definitions that they don't understand and concepts they don't understand, and that's tedious. I think we've moved past it. And it's time.
The definition wars are so 2015.
Yeah. Wasn't that a Black Eyed Peas song or something?
I think so. Yeah.
And
where is the atheism? Something like that.
Yeah. Dump It, I think it was called.
That's it. Yeah. But yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I've always said if the next generation fails to learn how to spell, it won't be because the Black Eyed Peas didn't do their part. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to next week in the wrap-up, and we'll have to find something else to discuss for after this.
Yeah.
Because I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've learned a lot. And I had an idea of a book, and I'll kind of, and I think um, it would tie into this discussion. And I think it's also kind of digestible and probably a bit more snarky than the book we just finished.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. And I mean, I can just get it from the local library.
Yeah, yeah, and it may or may not be one that, but it's kind of got my attention, and I'll shoot you a message and see if you have it. But uh, essentially, a kind of a Christian view of the atheist delusion.
Oh, is it The Atheist Delusion?
Yes.
I've heard of it, but I've not tried reading it or anything like that. But it's basically a response to Dawkins, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it deals with some of the arguments, but just an
We'll
idea.
give it a go. And it doesn't seem like particularly heavy theology.
No,
And I
it's
mean,
not. And
yeah,
it's and I was going to look at it for that, and it's by a universalist, so it's not coming from somebody. It's coming from someone that spends most of his time arguing with other Christians.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
See, I from the title, I took it to mean it was Frank Turek style guy who wrote it.
no, no. And I read one of this guy's books. His name is Bentley, and I read one of his books on um, eternal damnation, and
Yeah,
just to basically shitting all over that. Um, and he's just kind of like his pithy sort of um, uh, but a guy who's coming from a bit more and a strong philosophical background. And
yeah,
so I still like to read the Christian perspective from that kind of folk, not an apologetics, but someone that's, really, that you just have to trust that they wouldn't have gotten this far in their lives, um, you know, just on memes,
yeah, yeah,
and not struggling with the material. But yeah, it's definitely not like Kirk Cameron takes on Dawkins sort of thing. But
yeah,
and like I say, something that we probably won't agree with everything either,
yeah,
which might be a good kind of shit on both sides.
yeah. Which is what we love to do here.
Yeah, we like to do that. Yeah, and
Yeah.
this time it was kind of one sided, and everyone's like, well, what about the Christians? It's like, hold on,
Hang on, we'll get there.
we'll
Yeah.
get
Yeah, I'll get Emma to get the book from the library.
Yeah. All right. Well, and I'll just do kind of like a bit of a just because again, if it's super theological or super biblically driven, um, that then that's probably not a good idea. Um, but it more deals with the Dawkins and are the people that do watch this are going to be familiar with everything he's talking about, probably
Yeah.
more so, and a lot of the arguments that we hear. Maybe good to get a good, solid, well thought out Christian response, other
Yeah.
than the banana thing or something silly like
Yeah. Yeah. It's I try to stay away from low hanging fruit unless I can get some jokes out of it.
Yep.
And this sounds like it's not low hanging fruit. The
No,
title
no.
makes it sound like low hanging fruit, but
Yeah, it does. And again, I enjoyed his like I say, you always feel like he hasn't had his coffee yet, and you need to
yeah.
pay for it. And someone needs to pay for it. So
Okay, that sounds like exactly my kind of writer, if I'm honest.
yeah, definitely. He's definitely he's definitely past his limits of F's to give. So he's at a point in his life where he's just going to go. And again, and not to be, and he doesn't have like a huge platform or anything, so he's not doing it performatively. I just think he's just kind of clear and isn't afraid. Like I say, it was a book on eternal damnation, and basically, coming nothing short of basically saying, this can't be God. And if it isn't, then if this is God, then the people that are choosing not to believe in him are right. So, and then he goes into some of the history of it. And again, these are more, and at least this other book was more like homilies, or kind of like a sermon, but not preachy, but like a short essay or something like that. They're pretty digestible.
Nice one. Okay, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, nice one. We'll wrap it up here then, because I've got about half an hour before I've got to jump on a stream and debate free will.
All right. Well, I'm going to go and make sure that the gluttony towards liquor drinks is being addressed. And
the important things in life. Yeah, the important things. Nice one, Rev. Thank you for joining me again. It's been brilliant.
You take care, man.
Catch you. You too. Have a good night.
You too.
See you later. And everyone at home. See you soon. Bye.